They looked at your situation and made a fatal miscalculation. They saw someone standing alone, someone with limited resources, someone without a powerful network, someone carrying burdens that would have crushed most people long ago. And based on what they could see with their physical eyes, they came to a simple conclusion. You would be easy to defeat, but they were looking at the wrong battlefield. Because while they were studying your visible circumstances, they completely overlooked the invisible forces moving around your life every single day. They couldn't see the divine boardroom operating on your behalf. They couldn't see the doors being opened before you arrived, the conversations happening in rooms you've never entered, the protection surrounding situations you never even knew existed. While they plot in the dark, heaven is shifting resources, changing minds, and deploying forces to ensure your absolute victory. That is why so many attacks against chosen ones appear successful at first, but fail over time. The enemy evaluates what is visible. Heaven operates through what is unseen, and that difference changes everything. There have been seasons when you felt abandoned, times when the silence was so overwhelming that you questioned whether anyone was helping you at all. Moments when you looked around and saw no evidence that support existed. But appearances can be deceptive. Just because you cannot see movement does not mean movement is not happening. Just because a solution has not appeared, yet does not mean it is not already being arranged. And just because you feel alone does not mean you are unsupported. In fact, many of the greatest victories in your life were being organized long before you became aware of them. That is what this message is about. Not wishful thinking, not blind optimism, but the reality that chosen ones often underestimate how much spiritual protection surrounds them because that protection works quietly. It operates behind the scenes. It moves pieces into place without demanding recognition. And while others are busy counting your disadvantages, heaven is counting your assignment. That is why this spiritual war was never designed to end in your defeat. The outcome was being prepared long before the battle even began. One of the greatest weapons used against a chosen one is the illusion of isolation. Not actual isolation, the illusion of it. Because if you can be convinced that you are completely alone, you become more vulnerable to fear. You begin doubting your direction. You start questioning your purpose. You look at the size of the opposition and compare it to the resources in your hands, and suddenly the battle feels impossible. That is exactly what your enemies saw when they looked at you. They saw limited support, limited visibility, limited connections, limited influence. And because they judged your situation through human perception alone, they assumed they had accurately measured your strength. That was their mistake. Human vision is incredibly limited. People evaluate power based on appearances. They count followers, titles, money, status, popularity, visible alliances. They assume the person with the largest network is the safest. The person with the loudest voice is the strongest. The person with the most influence is the hardest to defeat. But spiritual warfare does not operate according to human measurements. Some of the most protected people look completely ordinary from the outside. That is why chosen ones are often underestimated. Your protection does not always announce itself publicly. It does not always arrive through obvious channels. Sometimes it appears as intuition, sometimes as timing, sometimes as unexpected opportunities, sometimes as a sudden shift in circumstances that makes no logical sense in the moment. And because these interventions happen quietly, people assume they are coincidences. But they are not. Look back over your life. How many situations should have ended differently? How many times were you somehow redirected away from disaster? How many moments seemed impossible to survive while you were living through them, yet somehow you emerged stronger on the other side? How many people walked away, only for better opportunities to appear later? How many closed doors eventually revealed themselves to be hidden protection? Those moments matter, because they reveal a pattern showing that even during your most isolated seasons, unseen support was still operating around you. The enemy never accounted for that. They looked at your circumstances and thought they were studying the entire picture. They believed what they saw was all that existed. They assumed your lack of visible backup meant your defenses were weak. Meanwhile, heaven was working through channels they could not detect. Resources were being positioned. People were being prepared. Timelines were being adjusted. Protection was being established. And none of it required public announcement. That is why some attacks never reached you. That is why some betrayals exposed themselves early. That is why certain opportunities appeared at exactly the right moment. The help surrounding your life has never depended entirely on what you can physically see. Read that again. Many chosen ones spend years worrying because they cannot identify every ally. They assume that because support is invisible, support is absent. But the reality is often the opposite. The strongest protection rarely needs attention. It simply does its job. And while your enemies were busy celebrating your apparent isolation, they failed to notice something critical. Every calculation they made was based on incomplete information. They counted your visible resources. They never counted heaven's. And that miscalculation is the reason this battle has never unfolded the way they expected. One of the most misunderstood forms of divine protection is interruption. Because when heaven protects a chosen one, it does not always look like advancement. Sometimes it looks like delay. Sometimes it looks like disappointment. Sometimes it looks like a door slamming shut right when you thought everything was finally working out. And in those moments, it is easy to believe something has gone wrong. But what if the delay was the protection? What if the canceled plan saved you from a trap you could not see? What if the opportunity that disappeared was actually leading you toward a disaster disguised as a blessing? This is where many chosen ones become frustrated. You pray for movement and encounter resistance. You prepare for a breakthrough and experience a setback. You expect a connection to develop, and suddenly communication stops. From a human perspective, it feels like loss. But heaven often sees what human eyes cannot. There are conversations you were never meant to hear. Motives you were never meant to trust. Situations that looked promising on the surface, but carried consequences hidden beneath them. And because you could not see the full picture, divine intervention had to step in before the damage occurred. That intervention rarely feels comfortable in the moment. In fact, some of the greatest protections of your life may have arrived disguised as rejection. Think about that. How many situations devastated you at first, only for you to later realize they would have brought enormous pain if they had succeeded? How many people left your life only for their true character to become obvious afterward? How many plans fell apart before a larger opportunity appeared in their place? At the time, you called it disappointment. Later, you called it protection. That pattern has repeated throughout your entire journey. Because heaven is not just focused on giving you what you want. It is focused on preserving your assignment. And sometimes preservation requires interruption. Sometimes the safest path forward involves preventing you from entering situations that would have delayed, distracted, or damaged your purpose. Meanwhile, your enemies interpret these delays completely differently. When they see a door close, they assume they won. When they see a plan disrupted, they celebrate. When they see temporary confusion around your life, they mistake it for weakness. What they do not understand is that some of those disruptions were specifically designed to keep their plans from succeeding. The connection failed because you were being redirected. The opportunity disappeared because something dangerous was hidden inside it. The timeline shifted because protection arrived before harm could. And because these interventions happen behind the scenes, very few people recognize them while they are unfolding. But heaven does not need recognition to be effective. It only needs obedience to its purpose. That is why some of the biggest frustrations in your past now look completely different when viewed through hindsight. What felt like abandonment was often guidance. What felt like rejection was often rescue. What felt like delay was often divine interception. And every interception carried the same message. You are too important to your assignment to be left unprotected. That is why certain traps never closed around you. That is why certain disasters never fully materialized. And that is why this spiritual war continues moving toward your victory, even when the path there temporarily looks confusing. Because heaven has been intercepting far more than you realize. One of the most remarkable things about divine alignment is that it does not always require you to force doors open. Sometimes heaven simply changes the people standing behind them. This is the part many chosen ones struggle to understand, because the world constantly teaches that everything depends on networking, convincing, proving, chasing, and fighting for approval. You are told that if the right people do not notice you, support you, or validate you, progress becomes impossible. But your journey has repeatedly shown a different reality. There have been moments when people unexpectedly favored you. Moments when someone gave you a chance they had no obvious reason to give. Moments when opportunities appeared through conversations you never initiated. Moments when individuals in positions of influence suddenly became willing to help, encourage, recommend, or protect you. And from the outside, it looked random. It wasn't. Because when heaven is moving on behalf of a chosen one of the most powerful tools available is the shifting of hearts. The right people begin seeing what others overlooked. The right minds become receptive. The right opportunities start moving toward you instead of requiring endless pursuit. That does not mean you stop putting in effort. It means your effort begins meeting alignment instead of constant resistance. And that difference is enormous. Think about how many times your life changed because of one conversation, one introduction, one unexpected encounter, one person who saw value in you when others failed to recognize it. Entire seasons can shift because a single heart becomes aligned with the direction heaven is already preparing. Meanwhile, your enemies cannot understand what is happening. They worked so hard to control perceptions. They spread doubt. They planted misinformation. They tried to shape narratives. Yet somehow people continue showing up to support you. Somehow opportunities continue emerging. Somehow doors continue opening despite the obstacles placed in front of you. To them, it makes no sense, because they assume influence belongs entirely to human control. They believe outcomes are determined only by manipulation, strategy, and appearances. But there is a force greater than public opinion. There is a power capable of changing perspectives, redirecting decisions, and positioning favor where it is needed most. And when that power begins moving, human interference becomes surprisingly limited. That is why some people who once doubted you suddenly changed their attitude. That is why some individuals who barely knew you became unexpected allies. That is why support often arrived from places you never anticipated. The help was already being arranged before you recognized the need for it. Read that again. Many chosen ones spend years worrying about who is against them while completely overlooking the people being positioned for them. They become so focused on opposition that they miss the quiet formation of support happening behind the scenes. But support has always been forming. The right conversations, the right relationships, the right opportunities, the right timing. And as these pieces continue moving into place, something remarkable happens. The very people your enemies counted on to ignore you begin seeing you differently. The very systems they thought would exclude you begin creating openings. The very circumstances designed to limit your progress begin contributing to your advancement. Not because you manipulated the outcome, but because heaven is capable of shifting hearts in ways no human strategy can fully explain. And when that process begins, even powerful opposition starts losing its grip. This is the stage that frustrates your enemies the most. Not when you succeed, not when you recover, but when they cannot understand why their plans keep failing. Because from their perspective, everything should have worked. They studied the situation. They calculated the odds. They identified what they believed were your weaknesses. Some spread doubt. Some attempted manipulation. Some quietly waited for circumstances to turn against you. Others simply expected life itself to wear you down until you eventually surrendered. And on paper, their strategy looked solid. That is why their confusion becomes so intense. They keep reaching the same conclusion over and over again. This should have worked. Yet somehow it didn't. The opportunity they thought would disappear finds a way to survive. The connection they expected to break somehow strengthens. The setback that should have stopped your progress ends up pushing you towards something better. The pressure that was supposed to exhaust you somehow makes you stronger. None of it fits their calculations, because their calculations never included divine intervention. They planned for your visible resources. They planned for your emotional limits. They planned for your circumstances. But they never planned for unseen protection. And that oversight changes everything. Imagine the frustration of watching a plan fail repeatedly without being able to identify the cause. Every time they think they finally understand the situation, something unexpected shifts. Every time they believe they have anticipated the outcome, a new variable appears. Every time they think they have boxed you in, another path opens. Eventually, confusion becomes paranoia. Because when manipulators lose control of outcomes, they start questioning everything. Why didn't that work? Who helped them? How did they recover? Why does support keep appearing? Why do opportunities keep returning? Why are they still moving forward? The answers remain hidden from them because they are looking for visible explanations to an invisible reality. And invisible realities are difficult for controlling people to accept. They want predictable systems, clear leverage, observable power. They want every outcome to be traceable to human influence. But what happens when the most important factor cannot be measured? What happens when protection operates outside their field of vision? That is the situation many of them are facing right now. Their frustration is growing because reality refuses to behave according to their expectations. The doors they expected to stay closed reopen. The people they expected to abandon you remain supportive. The opportunities they expected to vanish return in new forms. And the person they expected to collapse keeps standing. You. That persistence becomes a mystery they cannot solve. Because they assume resilience should eventually run out. They assume pressure should eventually win. They assume enough obstacles should eventually force surrender. But every time they expect defeat, they encounter evidence of protection instead. Read that again. Every time they expect defeat, they encounter evidence of protection instead. That is why confusion is spreading through the camp of opposition. Their plans were designed around a version of reality where heaven was not involved. And that version of reality never existed. The battle was never as one-sided as they imagined. The outcome was never as vulnerable as they assumed. The reason they remain frustrated is simple. They keep trying to explain your survival through logic alone, while the greatest force working on your behalf has been operating beyond their understanding from the very beginning. While they search for visible answers, the real explanation remains hidden from view. Heaven has been moving pieces, redirecting outcomes, closing traps, opening pathways, and preserving your purpose long before they ever realized they were fighting a battle they could never fully control. At some point, chosen one, you have to stop living as if you are unprotected. That does not mean becoming careless. It does not mean ignoring wisdom or refusing responsibility. It means finally recognizing that you were never carrying this battle by yourself. Too many chosen ones spend years exhausting themselves trying to defend every accusation, explain every misunderstanding, and anticipate every possible attack. They live in a constant state of vigilance, as if the outcome depends entirely on their ability to control every variable. But that is not confidence. That is fear disguised as preparation. True confidence comes from understanding that your security does not depend solely on your own strength. It comes from knowing that the same force that protected you yesterday is still protecting you today. The same divine intelligence that redirected disasters, exposed hidden traps, and opened impossible doors has not suddenly stopped working on your behalf. Think about everything you have already survived. The betrayals that should have broken you. The delays that later revealed themselves as protection. The seasons of uncertainty that somehow led to growth. The attacks that never achieved the damage they intended. You are standing here today because something greater than fear has been guiding your journey. That realization should change the way you move through life. You do not need to obsess over every enemy. You do not need to spend your energy monitoring people who want to see you fail. You do not need to constantly defend yourself against narratives that heaven is already dismantling. Your assignment is not to become your own security detail. Your assignment is to keep walking forward. Read that again. Your assignment is to keep walking forward. Let heaven handle what heaven handles. Let truth expose what needs exposing. Let divine timing arrange what needs arranging. And let your energy remain focused on purpose instead of paranoia. Because the moment you truly understand how protected you are, something shifts inside you. Anxiety begins losing its grip. Fear stops controlling your decisions. You stop reacting to every disturbance and start trusting the process that has carried you this far. That is the confidence of a chosen one. Not arrogance, not recklessness, but quiet certainty. The certainty that no matter what is happening behind the scenes, you are not fighting alone. And if heaven has invested this much into preserving your path, then your future deserves more trust than your fear. So before this message ends, I want you to remember something that your fear may have caused you to forget. You are far more protected than you realize. There were battles fought for you that you never saw. Traps removed from your path before you arrived. Doors closed for your protection. Hearts shifted in your favor. Timelines adjusted. Resources positioned. Opportunities preserved. And through it all, heaven never stopped working behind the scenes on your behalf. That is why you are still here. Not because the battle was easy. Not because there were no attacks. But because your assignment carries a level of protection your enemies could never fully understand. So stop measuring your future by your current circumstances. Stop assuming that what you can see is all that exists. Stop letting temporary uncertainty convince you that you have been abandoned. You haven't. The same unseen network that carried you through every previous season is still operating right now, even in silence, even in delay, even when you cannot immediately see the evidence. Keep walking forward. Keep trusting the process. Keep protecting your peace. And never forget that what heaven has decided to preserve cannot be easily destroyed by human opposition. If this message spoke directly to your spirit today, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who needs this reminder. And in the comments, type, "I am divinely protected." Let that declaration be a reminder to yourself that you are not alone in this battle, and you never were.